Hey everyone, welcome back and thank you for being here. This is episode two of Jean-Luc Nancy, the lecture series on Jean-Luc Nancy's Of Divine Places. Um, and I've been thinking about like what poetry I want to there are some poems that I'm reminded of, especially Saying Your Names by Richard Sykin, because that's one of the themes in Jean and Nancy's Of Divine Places. It's so hot. Um, I also just booked all or a lot of the campgrounds I'm going to be staying at for the next few weeks. So I'm really excited about that to get that solidified and to have a real plan about where I'm going to be each day. Um, at least for like housing, that's really important to know where I'm going to put my tent, park my car and put my tent. And they seem to all have campfire rings and when necessary, bear storage. Um, and the ones, yeah. Anyway, um, pretty cool stuff. I'm booked all the way through Yellowstone. So I've booked some stuff in West Texas and then New Mexico and then one night in southeastern Colorado, one night in South Utah, one night in North Utah. And I've spread out my stuff in New Mexico a bit between like I'm gonna see Carlsbad and White Sands and then some middle New Mexico and then spend still like 5 days in northern New Mexico on a lake actually. It's pretty close to Taos. I'm not going to stay as much inside of Taos as I originally thought. Um, Give me 1 second, you guys. All right, I'm back. So again with the share, we want to be side by side with that. Cool. My dad wants to play the radio, and I just asked him not to do it too loud. So you guys might hear stuff in the background, and yeah, I really hope it doesn't pick it up because that's a copyright issue normally for YouTube. Um, so I went ahead and got um we are recording. The recording is going. Okay. So we're not going to start with saying your names. Um, the first poem in the book of Crush. Crush is the 2004 Yale Series Younger Poets winner, judged by Louise Gluck. So I also have some poems from Louise Gluck that I'm interested in, especially from The Setting Sun. From Winter Recipes from the Collective. Um, I think for this first episode we'll do Vita Nova. Um, just the poem, not the whole book. And on the next episode, we'll do Snow and Dirty Rain and Winter Recipes from the Collective or The Setting Sun. There's a handful of good ones. Um, so let's start with Psychen. And we are going to read from Of Divine Places as well. But I think these are beautiful and worth spending some time on. So, Scheherazade, tell me about the dream where you pull the bodies out of the lake and dress them in warm clothes again. How it was late and no one could sleep, the horses running until they forget that they are horses. It's not like a tree where the roots have to end somewhere. It's more like a song on a policeman's radio. How we rolled up the carpet so we could dance, and the days were bright red. And every time we kissed, there was another apple to slice into pieces. Look at the light through the window pane. That means it's noon. That means we're inconsolable. Tell me how all this and love too will ruin us. These are bodies possessed by light. Tell me we'll never get used to it. And Vita Nova. This one's by Louise Gluck, not Richard Sykin. The other one was by Richard Sykin. I have the physical books. That was some pictures that I took of one of the books, made into a PDF, and this is from the Poetry Foundation website for Gluck. You saved me. You should remember me. The spring of the year. Young men buying tickets for the ferry boats. Laughter, because the air is full of apple blossoms. When I woke up, I realized I was capable of the same feeling. I remember sounds like that from my childhood. Laughter for no cause, simply because the world is beautiful. Something like that. Lugano, tables under the apple trees, deckhands raising and lowering the colored flags. And by the lake's edge, a young man throws his hat into the water. Perhaps his sweetheart has accepted him. Crucial sounds or gestures like a track laid down before the larger themes, and then unused, buried. Islands in the distance. My mother, holding out a plate of little cakes. As far as I remember, changed in no detail the moment, vivid, intact, having never been exposed to light, so that I woke elated at my age, hungry for life, utterly confident. By the tables, patches of new grass, the pale green, pieced into the dark existing ground. Surely spring has been returned to me, this time not as a lover, but a messenger of death. Yet it is still spring. It is still meant tenderly. We're not going to do the guiding questions again. But we are going to do the last two paragraphs of section 4 again. This is the part where Nancy introduces the wink. And I think this is a really central idea in understanding what it means to have a religious experience. There's this sort of winking that one experiences, for lack of a better term, a gesture, a seduction, an interest, a curiosity, um, a perception, a desire, but it's a wink. And so this is yeah, we're gonna start here. The quote, last God of which Heidegger speaks ought to be understandable in this sense. Not the God who comes after all the others, concluding their series, and perhaps not a God at all, but rather the fact that there is always another last God to be born, a last God to come or to disappear. Whether he comes or goes, and perhaps his coming is made up of his departure, his passing makes a sign. He is, I'm vorbegangen. Yeah, again. He is just passing or he is in passing. It is in passing that he is, which is why he has his essential mode of being in the wink. That is to say, in the gesture we make in order to give a sign, call, invite, lead on, seduce. A wink of the eye, a motion of the hand, the God, the last God, he who, in passing, invites, calls, leads on, or seduces, while, quote, signifying nothing. This could therefore be entitled A Wink from the Holy Virgin. It would be the movement of profanation, the Virgin becoming Venus. Pontevia studied this. That is to say, it would raise the question, what sort of advances does the profane make to us? Not that, like a good dialectician, the profane makes a sign in the direction of the sacred, but to, quote, give a sign is perhaps always divine. And the Virgin could be said to have given a sign for the first time, or else for the last, in the very profanation of the God, beyond the, quote, sacred. Number 5. I do want to check. Okay, just wanted to check that the recording was going properly. I also want to look at the footnote. There was a footnote for the wink. I want to make sure. So, uh, in an essay or something by Heidegger titled Holderlin and the Essence of Poetry, Heidegger writes, poetry is the original naming of the gods, but the poetic word only receives its power to name when the gods themselves bring us to speech. How do the gods speak? And nods have been since time immemorial the language of gods. We do have this in our copy, so I'm going to go to it now. Page 48, probably 47. 47 and 48. The poet's utterance is the act of being receptive to these nods so as to pass them on to his people. And here's what I was saying before about noun and name, and why it's important to enunciate. The French nom means both noun and name, and the text plays on this constantly. English is slightly handicapped in having two words. Um, Probably could have used a better word there than handicapped. But what is more, although there are proper nouns, common nouns, and proper names, common names is not a relevant term here. It was thus rather difficult sometimes to decide which of the words noun or name to choose. In each case, the reader should always be aware of the pressure constantly exerted in the original by the play of meaning that the word nom sets up. Okay, let's go back. And then there's just a foot onto theological. I tried to explain a lot of these footnotes to you already in a quicker way. Number 5. It would appear that the two questions, what is God and who is this God, are implied by each other. For we cannot ask, who is this God, if we do not already know we are dealing with a God, and if, consequently, we do not know what a God or the divine is in general. Conversely, we can only ask, what is God? When an existing being has been presented or indicated to us as God. However, this is only apparently the case. To ask, who is this God, does suppose that we recognize him as being a God. But this is not the effect of a knowledge of the divine previously acquired through examining the question, what is God? We recognize a God or as divine without having the least idea of what that is or even that it can be, but because it manifests itself as such. This constitutes what we call conversion. The divine is precisely what manifests itself and is recognizable outside of all knowledge about its, quote, being. God does not propose himself as a new type of being or of absence of being for us to know. He proposes himself, that is all. Conversely, the question, what is God, is not posed, despite appearances, once a God has in fact proposed himself. For by so proposing himself or imposing his presence, he has eliminated the very possibility of the question. The question, what is God, can only be put when nothing remains of God or the gods that is divine. That is to say, nothing that makes itself known through its manifestation alone, through its passing or its wink alone. The question arises when all that remains of the gods or of God is the name. God, a sort of strange, half proper, half common name or noun. And only then is it appropriate to ask what thing or type of being it signifies. Is, quote, God a proper name or a common noun? This is 6. Um, Somebody else just got home, so I may just decide to try to sit somewhere else. I'm gonna pause this here. All right, guys, we're back. I don't really have a good solution for somewhere else to record. We need the Wi-Fi for Zoom to work properly. And so I can't move in like into the woods and do this. When I'm not gonna have Wi-Fi while traveling, I don't plan to use my computer to record, plan to use my phone or something like that. Um, I mean, I can hear the music they're playing, but hopefully it the mic just doesn't pick it up. Um, we're gonna run it. We lost like 5 minutes, and I just have so much to record. I don't have anywhere else to do it, or any more time to waste. Um, so let's keep reading. 6. Is God a proper name or a common noun? St. Thomas denies it is a proper name, for the proper name does not refer to the nature of a being, but to that precise being, hoc aliquid, considered as a singular subject. Now, God is not a singular subject, says St. Thomas, although he is not a universal nature either. The common noun for its part refers to the nature of a being, but that of God is forever unknown to us. What remains is that the name God, refers to God by its operation, and through that at least he is known to us. It will be a name borrowed metaphorically from one of the divine operations, as St. John Damascene indicates. Damascene, God comes from, quote, God comes from Theon, which means provide for all things, take care of all things, or from Aethan, mean burn, for our God is a fire consuming all wickedness, or else from Theiste, that is to say, to see all things. And so here we have caring, burning, and vision. Um, so yeah, again, hopefully you guys aren't hearing the background noise. Um, Winchester, come here. Winchester, come here. Um, And there's some parallels here with care, burn, and vision to see all things. It seems like to see is associated with Avalokiteshvara, which is the Buddha of compassion. And the name Avalokiteshvara literally means one who sees with compassion. And so, uh, but also in Hinduism, we have creation, maintenance, and destruction as the three gods, Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva. Um, uh, Maybe in that order. Um, and so we have creation, which is Brahma. Just double checking. Brahma the creator, Vishnu the preserver, that's what I thought, and Shiva the destroyer. So I had them in the right order. And to me, I can see that parallel with Theon caring or providing. Um, Theon, which is Shiva or destruction or burning, which is how such destruction can be good, is it clears away room for new things, or it also destroys wickedness, which is something we just don't want to have anymore. So it's purifying. And then theiste, which is to say to see all things. And creation, it's interesting when you have these three-part models. Um, Winchester, stop barking. No, stop barking. I need you to stop barking. Hold on, guys. We're gonna have to stop this. All right, we're back. Um, So yeah, theiste, and in Buddhism, not in Hinduism, which is where Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva come from. In Buddhism, Tathagata means neither coming nor going, nor arriving or having arrived, or leaving, or remaining or abiding, but being beyond all coming and going, basically. Because it's just alternatively translated different things. Tathagata is the Buddha's preferred name for himself. I think it's the most explanatory. I like it a lot. Um, and we'll talk about this in the episode on Buddhism, but being beyond coming and going, and beyond that, not just abiding either, um, can parallel with the kleshas, three kleshas being desire, which is a chasing, or fear, which is a running. So, um, going too fast or going too slow. Uh, and then even if you're going at the right rhythm through your life and aware of your mortality and your grief, you may just be looking at it the wrong way. That's the down and dirty of Buddhism, in my opinion. It's like the 2-minute version. So you could try to see what parallels it has here with Thean, Aethean, and Theiste. Um, we're going to continue with Nancy. There is a more appropriate name for God, if we are considering the origin of the name, and that is he who is. But the name God, despite its metaphorical origin, remains the superior name when we consider what it has the task of signifying, that is, the nature of the divine. He who is does not qualify his nature. It signifies that he is, but not what he is, nor even that he is being. However, for St. Thomas, there is an even more appropriate name, and that is the Hebrew's tetragram. So I don't think I have any guiding questions about the tetragram, but it's pretty important as a way of naming God. or saying exactly how or what God is, which quote, which signifies the very substance of God, which is incommunicable and so to speak, singular, end quote. Hence well, this is all quoting Nazi. I'm not exactly, that was St. Thomas, I guess, who said that. Hence, the God who is considered as the preeminence of being, and not at all as a singular subject, is nevertheless acknowledged in the end to be in some way singular, and is answering to an unpronounceable proper name. The tetragram is in no way a metaphor either for care or for fire or for vision, but is the proper name for him whose proper name cannot be pronounced. The tetragram is magis proprium than any other name, but because it is unpronounceable, tetragrammaton is the name of this name, but is not the name. It is therefore also improper. Consequently, God, what we call God and not the name Deus Theos, and all its metaphors, is the very name of for the impropriety of the name. Tetragrammaton is the common name for this name, or for this name considered as the lack of a name. God, quote unquote, calls the God where his name is lacking, but the divine is a name that is lacking. That is why, above and beyond the metaphysics of the treatise on divine names, that from Pseudo Dionysius to Thomas and down to the present repeats that God is unnameable as the absolute excess of being over the word or the thing over the sign, is merely a law of metaphysics, which is eminently applicable in the case of the preeminence of being. Quote unquote, God is that common noun, that metaphor, proper/improper by definition, that becomes a proper name only when it is addressed to that singular existent who lacks a name. It is thus prayer, invocation, supplication, or whatever, addressed to the lack of a name. My God, life is there, simple and peaceful. My God, why hast thou forsaken? Addressed. So my God, what is 7? What does my God mean? It is in no way an appropriation, a privatization, even less a subjectivization of God. My God says that it is I alone each time who can call on God or the God. It is the voice of someone who is himself singular that can call upon and name that other singular being. Speaking of, quote, God, discourse speaks of the God, the gods, or the divine. But when someone speaks, they are addressing God. We say my God as we say my friend, or as we used to say my Lord, Monsignor, which became Monsieur. In each case, behind the apparent possessive, there in fact lies what we ought to call an interpolative. You, here, now, are entering into a singular relationship with me. This does not ensure the relationship, nor in any way provide the measure of it, but it proclaims it and it gives it its chance. My God, quote unquote, signifies here, now, I am entering into a singular relationship with the lack of a singular name. Hence our justification in asking who then has the right or the ability to say, my God. 8. There are 51 of these. Today, what is no doubt most crucial concerning God is this. He is not unnameable in the metaphysical sense of that being that is inaccessible to all names, of that being that transcends all names, including the name of being itself, according to an unbroken tradition that is the very tradition of ontotheology. St. John Damascene once again, quote, he is above all that is and above being itself. This brings to mind the divine superessence. So this could also be supra being, if you think that it is something outside of the rest of things. Superessence is within the group, super being is beyond the group. Of Pseudo Dionysius, Eckhart, or Risebrook, and even certain, and that's what the footnote says, or even certain of Levinas's injunctions, such as, quote, understand a God uncontaminated by being. God is not, end quote, God is not unnameable in that sense, because in that sense, unnameability is the result of an overflowing of names and language. Whereas the unnameability of the God to whom I address myself, if I can, results from the lack of a name. God is unnameable today in that his name or his names are lacking. There is no impotence on the part of names in general to express or refer to God. just as conversely, the unnameable is neither necessarily nor exclusively divine. After all, the name being is not appropriate to being either. The name being is not appropriate to being either. If, as Heidegger says, being, quote, is not. In fact, it could well be that the unnameable is never divine, and that the divine is always named, even if it is for want of a name. But it is the proper name of God that is wanting. I mean, I just couldn't like hope to try to um say everything he says in my own words. Like he says some really fascinating but specific stuff. Such for us is the fate of all divine names, or of the divine in all names. They no longer refer to gods. That is to say, we can no longer call upon the gods with these names. Indra, Zeus, Wotan, Yahweh, Jesus. They are as divine names and not as the nomenclature of worship, strictly unpronounceable. They no longer call upon, quote, my God. So it turns out that all divine names refer as to a common destiny written down in the in the distant past of the Western world to the unpronounceable capital name, the unutterable capital tetragram. The unpronounceable name, unutterable tetragram, but name and tetragram are capitalized. As if in Judaism it were written that the divine is destined to withdraw its own name, and in so doing to abscond from call and from prayer. And that we would then be left with only this withdrawal of the name of God in place of all gods and also in place of the God of Israel. When Holderlin writes, sacred names are lacking, or there is a lack of sacred names, es fehlen heilig Namen, he is not implementing the problematic of the treatise on divine names, and in contrast, this latter appears much more as constituting a problematic of the concepts of God. No doubts are cast in Holderlin on the possibility of divine names. On the contrary, the assertion of a lack of sacred names implies that we know what such names are, names, as Heidegger's commentary puts it, which are commensurate with the sacred or the holy, and which themselves cast light upon it. These names are thus not only peculiar propre to the divine, they bring it to light, they make it known as the divine that it is. These names are the manifestation of the divine. They are perhaps not far from being the divine itself. It is simply, if one may say so, that these names here and now are lacking. Thus, we are familiar with the name of God, and it is undeniable when all is said and done that it does bring to light something of the divine. However little, at least when we still say my God, in a sort of mild relaxation of thought and speech. However, even this name is seriously lacking. God, God, the God, the God, the gods, gods. Which way are we to take it? When Holderlin writes, Dear God, because in German all nouns take a capital letter, we do not know if it should be translated by the God or the God, with or without capital letters. But Holderlin himself does not know what he is naming. Der Gott names something divine that no longer has any identity, or else it names the very unidentification of the divine and of all the gods. The tetragram itself is drawn into this unidentification. It can no longer be the common noun for the proper name of the god, but is it in turn subsumed under this even more common noun, the god, which is the name of no presence of a god. And so a history ends as it began. In former times, so I have heard it said in Dodonia, the Pelasgians offered up all their sacrifices while invoking, quote, the gods, without referring to any of them by a qualifier or a personal name, for they had as yet heard of no such thing. What is a proper name? Is it part of, this is number 9. Is it part of a language? This is not certain. Or at least it is not certain that it is a part in the way a common noun is. It does not behave like a sign. Perhaps its nature, a proper name, is that of a wink, of a gesture that invites or calls. On that score, the lack of proper names has nothing to do whatever to do has nothing whatever to do with the metaphysical surfeit of the thing over the sign of the real over language, which is what St. Thomas was describing. The lack of a proper name is a lack of wink, and not of signifying capacity. It cannot be judged in relation to sense, but in relation to gesture. For the same reasons, it could be that there is something of the divine rather than any meaning in all proper names. Thus, all names could be given to the gods. So that if there is a lack of sacred names, it is not because certain names are lacking. There is a lack of naming, of appellatives, of address. I'm not going to read the Latin that's in the primary text. I am she, says Apuleius is Isis, whose single godhead is adored by the whole world in various forms, in differing rites and with many diverse names. Thus, the Phrygians, earliest of races, call me Pessinuntia, mother of the gods. Thus, the Athenians, sprung from their own soil, call me Cecropean Minerva, and the sea-tossed Cyprians call me Paphian Venus, the archer Cretans Diana Dictina, and the trilingual Sicilians Ortygian Proserpine. To the Eleusinians I am Ceres, the ancient goddess, to others Juno, to others Bellona, and Hecate, and Rhamnusia, but the Ethiopians are illumined with the first rays of the sun god, as he is born every day, together with the Africans and the Egyptians, who excel through having the original doctrine. Honor me with my distinctive rights and give me my true name of Queen Isis. 10. That God has a name, that the gods have names which are theirs, and which are consequently holy or sacred names. Of that there is no doubt. One thing only remains undetermined, whether, quote, the lack of sacred names amounts to a pure and simple absence, be it definitive or provisional, of the sacred, or whether this lack still belongs to the sacred itself. Okay. So whether the lack of sacred names is a pure and simple absence, definitive, essential, provisional, or whether it belongs to the sacred itself. So it maybe not essential, maybe essential is when it belongs to the sacred. Heidegger writes that the source of this lack is probably concealed in a reserve of the sacred. The lack of divine names, the suspension, dislocation, co-spacing, co-origination, and mid-sign, all things we should keep together. Partagé, we should be thinking all these terms together. Would thus be a way for the sacred to keep itself in reserve, to withhold itself. So thinking about disclosure and understanding versus confusion, and as a consequence thereby to offer itself in reserve, both as its own reserve and as its own withdrawal. The suspension of worship, no longer to be able to sing as in the Catholic hymn to the Holy Sacrament, Adoro te devote, laetens deitas, for there is no longer a latent divinity, that is to say, a divinity hidden by appearances and revealed as present in its latency. There is nothing latent, there is only the manifest, and what is manifest is nothing other than the lack of sacred names, visible and legible everywhere. There is no longer a single divine name that cannot be pronounced in the most profane and ordinary way. Moreover, proof a contrario, we no longer blaspheme the name of God. The divinity is not concealed by this lack. It does not pass from one form of latency into another. This lack reveals the divinity itself as suspended, right? Spaced out, distended. We should beware of the dialectical reserve, the Aufhebung to which Heidegger's words could give rise. I would argue that we should understand those words as meaning that it is the sacred itself that is lacking, wanting, failing, or withdrawn. The lack of sacred names is not a surface lack concealing and manifesting the depths of a sacred held in reserve. It bars the way to the sacred. The sacred as such no longer comes, and the divine is withdrawn from itself. Section 11. Just getting some coffee. I will say, my parents are being very gracious. It is Friday night and they love playing music in their barn loud. So I appreciate them compromising. 11. Just want to make sure everything's running properly. So recording, you can see me pretty well. You can see more of the background, which is the fun stuff anyway. Uh, do that. That's cool. Okay, fly. 11. I should like here without violence and without confusing them, to force together Levinas and Heidegger momentarily, and say the lack of sacred names is the adieu of the sacred, right? So adieu literally meaning to God or unto God. I think it's obvious that it means like Godspeed, like to God, because it means goodbye. Uh, but later he's going to think about the adieu in relation to time. If we were eternal and unchanging, immutable, we would have no uh capacity to be oriented towards another. And so we would not be able to be unto anything, and including not being able to be unto God. Because we're in time, we can be unto God. We can experience the adieu. Do. Uh, the lack of sacred names is the adieu of the sacred. An adieu from the depths of its withdrawal, a thought that is for the moment quite simply impossible, and impossible in any case as a unified thought. So he's thinking about the lack of God, the lack of sacred names, whether this is an essential part of God's nature or the divine or the sacred or God's. He's wading through the limits of language and exhausting the possibilities of how we might approach this discourse, emphasizing the wink and the motion and the gesture, um, but also the withdrawal and the limited, or I guess we should say the finitude of what can be known. Um, but I think he's making it by establishing the lack of all this and the uncertainty that we deal with in trying to understand God, and the way that God's our relationships to God and to the God, capital G, whatever, changes throughout our lives in different places, sometimes not finding God in the same place we used to find God, in the same ways we used to find God, and sometimes surprisingly finding God again, for there being a return of the God. All of these things point towards the lack or the withdrawal. Um, and I think it really clicked for me about halfway through, I guess, or a third of the way through, probably, when he says that it's in God's essential, it's in God. God is the being who wants to be unknowable. Gotta find where he put that. 14. So we're really close to it. Um, Probably gonna hit it in this. Yeah, it's 2 pages away. So he's really getting us set up for that in a few sections. So Levinas and Heidegger. Um, so weird because like Heidegger actively complied with orders to provide information on his colleagues that were Jewish to Nazis, and reported people and got them sent to labor and prison and internment camps. Levinas, like Sartre, was in internment camps, death camps, and it severely impacted his work. So it's just so strange for them to. They responded to each other. They developed or criticized. Levinas engaged Heidegger's work serious. It seems in the footnotes like he was doing it in a serious way. So I was really surprised by that. I guess I thought if Levinas can engage Heidegger, I can too. But it's still disgusting to me. Anyway, um, impossible in any case as a unified thought. Each of them knows that a waiting concerning the divine is inscribed at the heart of our experience, at the heart of our slow-footed Western necessity. For Levinas, this waiting, the vigil, traverses, in transit, and pushes to the breaking point consciousness, man, the self, being, and philosophy. In this breach of immanence, a presence comes, advent again, God, the infinite, the beyond of being, transcendence as an, quote, ethical each for the other. The breach delivers us up to an adieu. For Heidegger, the breach of immanence is constitutive of existence, of being there, and the God is not a presence that could come there. In this sense, Dasein is being unto death and not unto a God. But this act of ontological, so that's what Dasein means, being there. If nobody says that enough, I think the literal translation is being there. And then Mitsein is being with. So the idea is that being with, as an immediacy, primordial immediacy, allows for the individuation into being there. Mitsein creates Dasein. But this act of ontological constitution opens precisely onto the possibility of waiting for the strangeness of the divine, which would then, in short, be a strangeness strange to the infinite breaching of existence and of the existent. Dasein could be exposed to the divine, not in death, nor in its place, but as it were, at the same time as to death. Man dies continually under heaven before the divine, quote unquote. Thus, the possibility of a quote being unto God, ein mögliches Sein zu Gott, is opened up but not established. I could say the adieu of Levinas is constitutive of the quote passivity more passive than passivity, in which immanence is breached. Heidegger's being unto God or unto the God is merely a possible, opened up, offered, but equally withheld, withdrawn, in the finite transcendence of being unto death. Thought relates to the beyond of being and to the finiteness of being, to the for the other and to the for death. In each case, thought has to speak its adieu. It is doubtless too soon to be able to say what clashes or encounters, what evasions or confrontations mark its passage from one relation to the other. I simply wish to recall here the sign wink that is addressed thus to the thinking of our times. 12. The singular address to a singular God, my God, is prayer in general. The lack of names suspends prayer. To celebrate transcendence beyond being or the immanence of the divine, or else like the German mystics, whose heirs we all are, the quote, sublimeness of God, nowadays, quote, the sublime, has at times begun to take on the role of a new negative theology. Is not, nowadays, the sublime has at times begun to take on the role of a new negative theology. So to celebrate transcendence beyond being or the immanence of the divine, or else, like the German mystics, whose heirs we all are, the sublimeness of God, to do that, to celebrate that, is not to pray, is no longer to pray. To pray is first and foremost to name the singular God, my God. Prayer is suspended. All that remains is a distant quotation, citation in the memory. Schema Israel, Pater Noster, La Ilah, 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 or La. This recitation, like our cultural or cult memory of divine names, merely sustains the reality of a lack of prayer. This recitation prays for want of praying. It does not implore so as to be able once again to pray. It addresses a lack of prayer to a lack of sacred name. It is a litany laid bare. 13. A polemical note that it is unfortunately difficult to dispense with when one ventures to speak of, quote, God today. In the last few years, a sickening traffic has grown up around a so-called return of the spiritual and of the religious. Simultaneously, the religious aspect of recent Polish history, the avowed end of Marxism, the renewed assertiveness of Islam, the rediscovery and return to circulation of several currents of Jewish thought, have all been exploited, then indiscriminately and uncritically enlisted in the promotion of a new cultural value, a spirituality deemed necessary for a jaded Western world which has lost faith in all its, quote, ideologies. This is to forget out of stupidity or cunning the philosophical work that has been unremittingly carried out from a starting point in the death of God. Thinking today entails, among other things, recognizing and meditating ceaselessly upon this irrefutable and unshiftable event that has rendered derisory in advance any, quote, return of the religious. The death of God called for and brought forth a mode of thought that ventures out where God no longer guarantees either being or the subject or the world. At these extremes, over these abysses, or mid this drifting, no God could possibly return. First, because there is no reason why the divine should lend its name to baptizing or to making something sacred. Its name to baptizing what thought explores or confronts in its withdrawal. Second, because gods are always coming, or at least can always come, but now doubtless never come again. Forgetting the death of God, when not politically or commercially motivated, is tantamount to forgetting thought. It is, moreover, ironic, though not really surprising, to note that this, quote, return of the religious proposes itself at the same time and often under the same colors as the return of an empirico-liberal pragmatism. Roughly speaking, of the Popperian variety, that accurately reflects in an identical forgetting of thought the actual, quote, spiritual content or conduct of these movements of opinion. That's the end of the 13th section. And then 14 again is where we start to, I think it clicked for me there. We're getting close to being out of time too. 14. What is God? Quote unquote. Is the question of a man wanting for prayer, wanting for divine names. It is the question of a man wanting for God, which is not necessarily to say lacking God, or else it is the question put by a man to the want of God. It is Holderlin's question, which Heidegger chooses to take up, and because the question, who is the God, is, quote, perhaps too difficult for man and asked too soon. So then there's an indented section, and it's a poem with 5 lines. What is God? The sky's aspect, though so rich in qualities, is unknown to him. Lightning, indeed, is the anger of a god. All the more invisible is that which has its envoy in something foreign to it. The world is unknown to God. The visible and its brilliance, appearing l'apparaître, is unknown to him. But he, the invisible, delegates himself, or rather sends himself, or destines himself in the visible. Something foreign in which, having sent himself there, he is all the more invisible. Heidegger writes, the invisible sends itself there so as to remain what it is, invisible. So what is God? He who wishes to remain unknown. He who wishes, sending himself in the visible, there to remain invisible. God is not the Hegelian absolute who wishes to be close to us. God does not wish to be close to us when he sends himself to us. In the visible we know. He wishes to make himself invisible therein. But what if the fact that he wishes to remain himself absolutum, separate in his invisibility at the heart of the visible in which we dwell, were another form of the same absolute will? And if that is indeed the case, can we still be content to go on conceiving of God, with or against Hegel, with or against St. Augustine, as a form of extreme intimacy? Will a day not come when we shall have to confront a God outside, exposed in the open sky, nowhere hidden and internal to nothing? We must leave these questions to find their own way. God is that which knows not the world, and which does not manifest itself there, does not present itself there, although it penetrates it, sends itself, and dispatches itself therein. The beginning of Patmos is well known. Quote, he is near and difficult to grasp, the God. The nearness of the God is inscribed in these other lines, out of which Heidegger develops his commentary. Is God unknown? Is he manifest like the heavens? It is rather that which I believe. Heidegger writes, this God who remains unknown must, at the same time as he shows himself for who he is, appear as he who remains unknown. End quote. The God is therefore as manifest as the heavens. He is as revealed, offenbar, as the open sky and offered to view, self-same with its aspect. And there's a footnote on the use of self-same instead of amem. So amem means like on the face of, but it also means mem means identical. That's why it can mean like similar to mimetic. So self-same here is very much that wink or that transubstantiation or the replacement, the switch between art that we haven't really talked about art that much yet. The switch between art and the divine or the experience of the face of God on the face of the heavens or on as self-same as the open sky. The face of God is as manifest as the Angesicht of the heavens. Heidegger writes that the God who remains unknown is as much made manifest by the heavens. But the poem does not say that God is made manifest by means of the heavens. What it says is quite different. The God is as manifest as the heavens. That God is manifest like the heavens, that is to say, he is as visible, as offered to the view of men, as the radiance open and offered over the entire horizon, indicates that the radiance of the divine is equal to that of the heavens, but not that it is mediated by it. The God may very well be made manifest self-same with the heavens or with the sea or with the skin of man or the animal's gaze, and the God may have their own invisible place, right? Not the visible. So how does the invisible relate to the visible in this on the face way? It may be that he is manifest self-same with everything that is open and offered, and in which he has dispatched himself. But none of that serves as a representative of the God. Contrary to what Heidegger's text may at least lead us to believe, if the heavens, or if aspect in general, Angesicht, countenance, is also the place of divine revelation, it is not as a visible image of the invisible. The invisible divine lets itself be seen resting itself upon the face or woven into it, sent or destined therein, but as another face that lets itself be seen here, without here serving as mediation for it. This immediacy of the God, who is nevertheless not something immediate, this immediacy withdrawn from proximity and immanence in its most manifest presence, is no doubt so unamenable to our modes of discourse that Heidegger, like Hegel perhaps before him, seems to lose sight of it almost as soon as he has glimpsed it. This immediacy of the God, the wink of the face of the God. Here, on a face, but equally perhaps in a name, the divinity lets itself be seen, manifestly invisible and invisibly manifest. God reveals himself, and God is always a stranger in all manifestation and all revelation. Revelation, if such a thing must be conceived of, is not a presentation or a representation. It must be the evidence of the possibility, but never the necessity, of a being unto God. What there is revelation of is not God, as if he were something that can be exhibited. That is why to the question, what is God? There is and there is not an answer. It is rather the unto God, ladu, or being unto God. Or more exactly, it becomes manifest that such a being unto God is possible, that man is invited and permitted to be, that is, to die before the face of the God. Pascal, quote, or Pascal, quote, instead of complaining because God has hidden himself, you will give thanks to him for having revealed himself so much. We're going to cut it here so we don't run over the hour mark, so we can go on multiple formats. I haven't started posting anything yet, but we'll do it soon. It's already on YouTube. So thanks for your patience, guys. I think it's going fine with the audio, so we're going to try to keep doing some more tonight after this processes. So hang in there. Take care. Good seeing you as always. And soon these videos will be, we won't have the camera screen, the computer screen anymore. But you'll get full blast, probably a few feet away on a tripod. So you'll hopefully see my whole frame and the scenery behind me. I tried to pick some really cool campsites that will be good spots to record nearby at. They have picnic tables usually, and I try to pick ones with good mountain backdrops, tall trees, stuff like that. So I'll see you guys soon. We're gonna have a lot of fun. Take care and keep reading. Thanks for being here.